Hello, my name is Steve Smith, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Intellispark, and I'm joining today from Arlington, Virginia. Intellispark reaches about 70,000 students in more than 400 schools across the country. We've got a platform that helps schools know the name, face, and story of every child so that educators can better meet students' individual support needs. This work is personal to me. My father taught high school English before serving as an assistant principal and principal in a number of high schools in the New York metro area. And my mother spent her entire career as a teacher, spending about 30 years teaching first grade. In my own career, it's been a privilege to devote more than 25 years to supporting K-12 educators. Today's webinar, Resiliency, an Essential Element for SEL, is a topic that's very important to us. In fact, resiliency is at the heart of Scholar-Centric by Intellispark, which is an evidence-based program that helps to improve student outcomes by measuring and teaching resiliency. I'm pleased today to welcome Boston University professor Dr. Scott Solberg, who is a key advisor to me and to the rest of our team and whose research underpins Scholar-Centric. Scott's a professor in the Department of Counseling and Applied Human Development at BU's Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. He works across the country and internationally on the design, implementation, and evaluation of effective career development programs and services, especially for high-need youth populations. Some of you may know him for his recent book, Making School Relevant with Individualized Learning Plans, helping students create their own career and life goals. I have a copy right here, published by Harvard Education Press. It's a terrific book and it's an easy read, and it's available on Amazon. The format of today's session is something like a fireside chat, though unfortunately, my home office lacks a fireplace. But over the next hour, I will ask Scott some questions. And while we can't see or hear you, we encourage you to engage through the chat and Q&A. And we'll do our best to get to topics that you'd find especially helpful. One of my colleagues will monitor the chat and occasionally add contacts or links or references that you may also find helpful. Please note the session is being recorded, and we will make it available in case you'd like to share it with a colleague. Be on the lookout for 2 emails from us in the coming days. One will have a certificate of attendance, and the other will have a link to the recording. Both emails will include information on how you can get Scholar-Centric for your school at a special rate when you buy by December 31st, just for attending today's webinar. So without further ado, I am pleased to welcome Scott and to kick us off with the first question. And it's admittedly a little bit of a softball, but I promise they will get harder from here. So Scott, how do you define resiliency?
All right, well, thank you, Stephen, for this opportunity, and definitely excited to talk about this topic. And also want to encourage everyone in the chat and the Q&A, put down the questions, things you're interested in learning about, hoping we can talk about a lot of different topics. I know Steve has a really good agenda that I think covers the broad areas, but would love to make sure we're also addressing questions that are going on right now. And we know that as educators and as community members, we know there's a lot going on, a lot of stress and a lot of challenges. So we need to be taking care of ourselves around resiliency as well. So we're defining resiliency. The focus is first of all on 6 broad areas. These were areas that the research, this is where we started. We've added a couple of more, we can talk about some of those too. But the 6 main areas were things that were malleable. They were things we could change in a classroom type setting, community-based organization. Things like the value of education. Do you feel like, do our youth feel that their current school is important? And do they see some kind of post-secondary pathway as relevant to supporting them in their future? Is just the value. Do we see importance here? Why am I here for a reason? Confidence, which is really self-efficacy, always has been, but when we started writing about this, self-efficacy wasn't really part of the nomenclature. Now it is, so we can actually replace it, thankfully, with self-efficacy. And that's Albert Bandura's concept around the fact that when you feel confident in your ability to produce these complex behaviors, you're more likely to do it. And when you're challenged, you're likely to persist at it. So self-efficacy is a really important piece, and there's great research showing how we help build confidence within a tier 1 classroom environment. Stress management is another one, which is, we're all involved in stress management, and COVID's certainly bringing that out now, right? With all the disruption and the trauma we're experiencing, the ability to manage through has never been more critical, but it's always been an issue. It's a lifelong issue. And so focusing on the ability to manage through stress, I think, is really important and an important area of resiliency. Health and well-being. How are we managing through the challenges we experience around being agitated, feeling down, not eating well, not sleeping well? These are things that we have to really focus on both as a barometer of how we're doing, but also being able to put together some SMART goals around improving in these areas. We also look at, DC and Ryan's whole model on self-determination theory, which is about motivation. And it's about the ability to see whether the work I'm doing, whether it's in school or out of school, is it meaningful to me? Is it relevant? Really, really powerful and important stuff. And then the last one that's our first set, and then maybe Steve, I can just talk about a couple others that we use as well. But the first one is connectedness. When I was a doctoral student on my dissertation, I was convinced that belongingness was the key word. I needed to study belongingness. And my faculty said, well, can you find a measure of belongingness? And I said, no. They said, well, then you can't study it. So we know it's important, right? We know that's a critical issue. We now have connectedness. And more importantly, the way we measure it is your perceived availability of social support. So I did do a lot of research in that topic. And it turns out that when I believe I have people around me to support me, that I can rely on, that is a huge resiliency factor. So we look at connectedness with with you as educators, with their peers, and with their family as a really important area to consider as well. And we've also added some additional ones in our college and career readiness area, which has to do with goal setting. Are they actively engaged and proactive in setting goals? Really important as thinking about that as a resiliency skill. And as well as thinking about my future in terms of confidence to do the career connection. So self-efficacy, but now focused on navigating into my future as another component that when and we've got some good research on that we can probably go into in a little bit around just having future purpose and how that really transcends in preparing them for adulthood. But I'll pause there because I know I talked a lot. So please use the chat. I'm just going to say a lot. There may be things that are unclear or things you want more details on, and please make it a conversation by using the Q&A in the chat.
Hey, Scott, you raised this question about students just sort of being able to connect the dots, seeing the value of education. But, I think all of us have experienced that conversation with a teenager or even a younger student. Sometimes it's like, when am I ever going to use this? Like, why am I learning this? I mean, how do you overcome that kind of a concern? Because if it is really important that students understand the value of education.
Yeah, well, that comes back to the book, right? The idea of using individualized learning plans is a terrible word, by the way, and every state has a better name for it. But it's around personalizing my learning experiences by first establishing some goals and that future orientation of here's something I want to do in the world, not career. Let's take the word career out of it altogether. It's about the future. What is it about the future that I'm excited about that I want to move towards? And it's that idea of establishing this future sense of potential and possibility that then naturally leads to reflecting on, well, what am I doing right now to prepare for that future? And so the difference here is that we have told, and I'm perfectly guilty of this as well. I give my daughter lots of advice. Wife keeps saying to me, why do you keep doing this? You know it doesn't work. And we know it doesn't work. Giving adolescents and teens advice, right? They know everything they need to know. So we have to create a discovery process where they discover the fact that, wow, if I'm interested and excited about something in my future, I'm discovering what I need to do to get there. And that's what we found through this whole process. In Massachusetts, we call it my career and academic plan. In Georgia, I think you used to call it the Peach State plan, but I'm not sure what you're calling it now, but you have a career development strategy as well in this. And all over the country, you all have different names for it. But the point of it all is that you start directing their own pathways because they find out something that's important. They then look at education as relevant, and then the post-secondary pathways. And we use post-secondary instead of college because we want them to focus on going to the world of work. It could be training programs. It could be a 2-year or a 4-year. And if anything, we want them doing all of that. So it's this. So we leverage the relevance of school by helping them come up with valued goals for their life future.
Thanks. No, that's really helpful. So what led you to this focus on resiliency in your research?
Well, basically because the work I do is with what I call high opportunity, high need, high opportunity youth populations. So I've been focusing the dominance of my work in urban settings with low income youth of color, youth who are in schools where there's a history of low performance and outcomes. that's where I feel we need to have the largest impact. Is we need to be focusing on how to design these systems to be more effective in serving youth and providing them with these opportunities. And I say that for the reason that, and this is for my sociology background, I don't believe that I can find something that works in a suburban higher income setting that will transfer naturally into the lower income setting. We've got more trauma, complexity, but I can find something that works down in, as we found out in Milwaukee, down in South Milwaukee High School. When we can find that it works in that setting with all the challenges and the traumas that they've had, it's likely going to be something that will also work in other settings. And so for me, it's a matter of working with the educators in those settings to build the skills that they need. And that's why we call them malleable skills, the resiliency, that's going to help them navigate through the education challenges and the life challenges that they're facing, with the idea that these same skill sets, right, valuing one's purpose in life and future, confidence, all that stuff, these are life skills that's going to transcend high school. They're going to take that into the academics if they go into the post-secondary as well as in life. And it turns out that's exactly the case. The variance that accounts for why students don't complete post-secondary when they came out with the skills is because they don't have these, what we also now call social emotional skills. And we can maybe go in, it might be now to talk a little bit about why we call it resiliency and not social emotional learning skills. While they are the same, the difference is that when Ann Maston talked about resiliency, what she was talking about was that during times of threat, during times of challenge, during times of trauma, these are the skills that rise up. The individuals with these skills are able to manage through those challenging situations naturally because they have this resiliency component. And that's exactly what we found in our research. We were able to find a group of youth who reported that they had high exposure to violence. And I won't go into the details of what they said, but it was there. And there was a group of students that when they had these 6 areas, they were doing fine in school. They had the highest exposure to violence. They had the highest level of these skills, and they were doing okay academically. And that's what we're talking about. It's a buffer. It's helping support them and really coming alive, especially during these times of challenge. So yes, they're good for everyone, and that's why we talk about social emotional learning. They're especially critical for individuals when they come into points of challenge.
Wow, thank you. No, that's really helpful. So Scott, one question that has come in for us in the Q&A goes back to the point you made about goal setting. And you brought up goal setting. This question asks, points out it's a large part of ACT therapy, which I take as acceptance and commitment therapy. And so is it possible that you could speak a little bit about how ACT as a modality could help with resiliency?
Yeah, let me just have 1 second for that then. So yeah, the acceptance and commitment therapy is definitely, it's great, right? And I know my sports psych students love it. Where we have to be careful is where we're putting the onus on the situation in terms of defining where the problem is. And so sometimes we do have trauma and we have stress and we have to, and structural inequities like racism that have to also be called out. And so it's not just accepting that in these kinds of things, we have to accept and certainly forgive ourselves, and there's definitely forgiving situations, but we also have to not in any way communicate that the reason the challenge came up was because of something the individual was doing. The resiliency skills we're looking at are ways of managing through, but we're not wanting to, we have to be very careful not to place the definition of the problem that would be placed inside the individual, that you would be doing just fine if you are able to do these things. That's not always the case for a lot of youth that are in some of these situations. And so, so that's the only area where it's just a little bit, we have to take a little bit of care. And Chris, if there's more to that question that I missed, please put something back in the thing.
So building on that, there's a question that we also received in the chat, just asking about special considerations or points of emphasis when working with students who are low income or who are living in urban areas where they may be facing some different challenges from some of their peers in other parts of the, in the suburbs or elsewhere.
So I missed that because I was reading the Q&A.
So
say that one more time.
About students who are in a low-income household
Yeah.
or in an urban environment? Are there special considerations or points of emphasis that you would raise?
Um, I think what we're trying to do is, for those that are in the low incomes, my issue is, what control can you have within this context? This is not about locus of control in the sense of responsibility of that I'm at fault for something, but responsibility means, how can I respond within this context? That's very different, right? So it's not my fault that poverty, violence, we had so many gangs and we had kids getting killed. We had all this stuff going on around us. But out of all that, what are some things I can do to manage through that? Where can I focus my attention? So in that way, it's both. The key message is not that it's your fault that we're having the challenges. In fact, we're going to argue it's not okay. And this is an issue that as a country we've never quite dealt with, is the fact that we have so many communities that are at war. This is just unacceptable. That we have to be really we have to be owning about that. We have to be upfront about that. And we don't say but, and we got to manage through with what we have right now. How can we begin doing that? So it's sort of almost like we're trying to help the individual manage through to something better, a brighter spot, despite the fact that there's so much going on that they can't control. This is the same thing we're using for COVID too, right? It's like we have no control over COVID. We have no control over the responses and things happening. But we have to find ways individually to do self-care so we can start managing through more effectively through that process.
Yeah, and I think building on that point, there's another question in the Q&A that talks about cultivating resiliency in students who are dealing with issues beyond their control. And that certainly are some of the factors that we've been discussing, where a student may be growing up in a particularly violent environment, but a student may also be dealing with other personal issues that are beyond their control. And the question here deals with things like height or physical differences. So just curious if you've got any other sort of guidance or advice to offer.
Fantastic. Thanks, Christy. These are great questions. So let's take the height issue, right? Person is, 4 foot tall and wants to play basketball in the NBA, things like that, right? Which is where we get into height, or want to be a professional football player and I'm 5 feet tall, I'm right there. The first thing is, I never say no, right? I never say no. I never tell anyone, oh, that's unrealistic. Get the realistic word needs to get out of our vocabulary. What we want to do is just test it out. Let's see if it's viable. And let's come up with 2 other future goals. Let's look at some other possibilities. The establishing of the future goals gives a sense of hope and potentiality. As they get natural feedback from their systems about things that can happen, we can deal with that. So when a person says, I want to play in the NBA, and we know that looking at the height and the speed, and they're not even playing on the high school team or whatever, what am I hearing? I love basketball. Fabulous. Do you know how many jobs are involved in the basketball area? If you want to be close to basketball, there is hundreds of things you can be doing there, right? In fact, the players themselves is the smallest occupation within the enterprise of the NBA. Same thing with football, same with baseball, right? So what I want to do is get them to start exploring the range of potentialities so they can be connected to those areas that they most enjoy. Same thing for youth with disabilities. For youth with disabilities, we're talking about self-determination skills. It's having choice. It's having a sense of power that I can navigate somewhere in the environment. So when I have someone with a very significant moderate disability and they're saying they want to be a doctor, what I hear is, I want to be involved in healthcare. We can come up with a customized employment setting within the medical field for that individual to be in a place they want to be in, because there's something about that they enjoy. And so it is a dynamic process that we want to do. I also want to talk about students with disabilities that are not significant, but it's a learning disability or something else. This is tough, because I'm not feeling competent in one area. It actually derails any sense of future potentiality. So we have to work harder with youth to help support them in finding those future sets of goals. And that means we need more touches with the world of work. We need to get them seeing potentialities and possibilities. And then from that, the resiliency skills are really huge. Let me give you one example on the mental health part of the disability spectrum. So in Barnstable, Massachusetts, they told me a story about a young man at the middle school age level who was not learning because he was so angry and so upset all the time that all the time was spent focused on managing that anger. And one day the firefighters came in and they were talking about what they do and how they do it. And the question came up, what's the most important skill a firefighter needs? And it turns out it's composure, which makes sense. We don't want them running into a fire saying, I'm not feeling so good today. I'm not sure, I've been having a bad morning. I don't know how this is going to go. No, you want someone who's ready on the stage to do the work, right? So this individual was just totally crushed because they knew that because of all of this emotional and deregulation they experience in school, they're not going to become a firefighter, right? They go home that weekend, come back, and for the first time in 2 years, they start focusing on their schoolwork. And they start focusing on what they needed to do. They get to the high school. And so that was the end of the story, by the way. That was the story I was told, how much the students started learning. I gave this presentation in a big room full of all these different high schools. And a woman at the very back of the room raised her hand and says, I can finish that story. So when the person came into high school, they in fact continued into a pathway to become a firefighter. The fire station adopted this individual as their project to really support them in being able to do this. They got their EMT. And at the week before I was giving this session, they saw this individual out raising money in the full fire suit. And they were in line to become a firefighter at that station. So what we're saying that is when youth gain goals and we support them in really learning about the goals and how they can achieve it, they're ready to start managing through some of these challenges. They'll look for ways and want to learn ways for the accommodations and supports needed to have access to these kinds of areas of world of work. So that's the kind of message on that. This work I do has been funded. A lot of the work has been funded from the Office of Disability Employment Policy at our Department of Labor, and it's been a major component is making sure this is all relevant and meaningful to that. Now I have a question on grit in the Q&A, and I know there's stuff going on in the chat. Where would you like to go, Steve?
I'd like to hold that question about grit because we will come to that. I know that's a really important topic. And I want to just ask first, because I know in a lot of schools, probably most of the schools that are on this call today, use some form of an early warning system. And I've heard you describe resiliency as an early warning indicator. And I just wonder what you mean by that and how schools should think about measuring resiliency alongside traditional early warning measures like attendance, behavior, or grades, et cetera.
Yeah. So big fan of the early warning system concept, right? And those who know Robert Balfont from Johns Hopkins was one of the first to really call this out and really get us focused on those. And ABC, the ABC model of attendance, behavior reports, and course performance as being the early warning kind of pieces. And I know in Massachusetts, we have a whole database on what those early warning pieces are within the ABC at the different grade levels, which is fantastic. What we're doing is providing predictive analytics that tell you who is going to show up on that ABC, right? Who's going to be most likely to slow down on attending? Who's most likely to have some behavioral challenges as well as mental and emotional challenges? And who's likely then to start slowing down on their progress academically? So by calling it an early warning, what we have are the prediction of those ABCs. So if you think of the ABC as sort of the summative assessment of what happens, there's a lot of causes before that to make them become at risk. That's what we're looking at. And we've been able to do this starting in middle school to say, look, let's see who's coming out of high school, right? Or out of middle school as they get ready to enter. And we had pretty strong predictive analytics of which ones were not going to be as successful in high school. And to the point that our assessment tool is organized around that then, because we have an idea of what the profile looks like for someone coming out of middle school who's most at risk for not doing well as a result. So we're predicting who's going to show up on that ABC in time. And we've had lots of pushback from principals in the past. They'll call us up saying, you're telling us our valedictorian is the one that's on this at-risk list. Are you crazy? Your assessment's wrong. And our answer, which is the same to all of you, go talk to the student. And then they would call back and apologize. Oh, we didn't know. And we've heard stories like they're homeless. They just had a mental health challenge that put them in the hospital, suicidal, that all of these things that they had no idea about for their top students. And that's the issue. There are, especially as we're talking about our lower income and urban youth who are in such vulnerable conditions, things happen. And they may be doing great academically with great potential, but things happen. And we have to be able to support and monitor and provide them the care before they start going off the rails. And that's sort of where we're taking it.
Awesome, thank you. And I do want to come now to Talon's question, which is, is resilience different from grit? And I remember an early conversation where you were very clear that there's a strong distinction. So I was hoping that you could help explain that.
Yeah, no, Dr. Duckworth is doing phenomenal work, and it's obviously getting great credit for this concept. The main element, as I understand grit, a lot of it has to do with perseverance under stress and pressure. The distinction has to do with whether grit is malleable or whether it's a trait. And the original work describes it as a personality trait. And what that means is you're either born with the capability of becoming someone with grit or not. And of course, I'm not saying it's a yes or no, it's obviously on a dimension. I've always been focusing my work on what can I help you do in the classroom that's going to support their success. So I'm looking for malleability. Self-efficacy is very strongly tied to perseverance. And we've got great experimental data saying that when you feel confident in your ability to manage a situation, you stay in it longer. And when you're challenged, you rise to that challenge by putting out more effort. That's to me that's what we want, right? And so if I can showcase that through self-efficacy, then to me, that's where I put it, because I've got 4 sources of self-efficacy that we can embed within the learning process, right? They need mastery experiences. They need to see people that are encouraging and hear from you as a mentor. They need to watch others doing it well. And they need to manage through the emotionality, that whole kind of, taking the deep breathing, the mindfulness we're doing. Things that give them a sense that they can control the situation is where self-efficacy comes from. So that's where the distinction comes from. I haven't been focused on studying grit. Maybe there's been reconceptualizations, but I know for a while there was anxiety about asking teachers to be held accountable for measuring grit because there wasn't that understanding of how grit develops, other than it being something that we're born with as a propensity, if you will. So that's kind of the distinction.
So if you talk about being able to really build resiliency, essentially you're teaching resiliency skills that helps to boost resiliency, which helps to build these kinds of positive outcomes that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach teaching it? I mean, is it something that should be its own class? We all know how hard it is to get more time into the school calendar. So how do you incorporate resiliency as a topic to be taught?
So, we have a curriculum that provides an opportunity for you as educators to really engage in authentic conversations. And I'll say this now, it's important. We have implicit biases. We're finally talking about our implicit biases. We need to allow ourselves the opportunity to hear from youth about their lived experiences in ways that allow us to reconceptualize those biases. And that's really part of the dynamic, is a conversation that's authentic and real, that allows us to share our experience, but gives youth a voice and a chance to share out who they are and what they're about. And as we do that, in a classroom, I can't think of any class where that shouldn't happen, right? This is about building stronger relational connections with our students. And so all the curriculum does is it facilitates those conversations around the 6 dimensions. How can we as a class talk about building on self-efficacy? What's an area we can get control over and want to improve on? What's an area of our emotional and psychological health that we want to improve on? These are the real things going on with youth. And if they're able to feel comfortable talking about and working with each other and realizing these are normal, they're going to give you so much more effort in that class. Our math teachers loved this work because they felt like they had leverage now, that when the student wasn't focused, hey, weren't you the one that wanted to be a veterinarian? Well, then we need to start focusing back on math, right? Because you start with future goals. Let me go to Tracy's important question here, because it fits into this too. How do we help students with a strong external locus of control in this process? And the answer is just what I was saying. It turns out, and we've got the research to support this, and so does DC and Ryan in this work. It's about relational, it's having strong relationships. When they feel connected to you as an educator, and when they feel connected to their peers, they shift from an external to an internal locus of control. And it's amazing to see it. It's so powerful, it's crazy making. The goal setting, when they start setting future goals, the correlation between setting future goals and finding school meaningful and relevant, which is how we measure internal locus of control, it's almost a 1.0 correlation. It's like the same exact construct. Future hope, I'm here to learn. Connected with my peers and educators, I'm here to learn. So yes, we can address this external locus of control naturally. The other part is, some elements of external locus of control aren't necessarily a problem. We have deadlines, right? We give them deadlines in terms of when things get done. I prefer mastery, give them the chance to master these skills as opposed to a specific make or break kind of a grade activity. But the idea of allowing them to have some control over the lessons of what the timing is, when they'll get it done, maybe give them the whole quarter to demonstrate things, can also give them some control while you're also providing some external controls to get them going. So sometimes the external controls can be motivating, but that moving them to the internal is not as difficult as it sounds. And it happens very quickly in classrooms where students feel they belong, where they feel cared about and supported. It's very powerful and happens immediately. So that's a pretty amazing thing.
I'd actually like to go right to this question that just came into Q&A, because we've got a really diverse group of folks who are on this call today. We had almost 500 people register for the event, and they really represented administrators, counselors, teachers. But I can certainly, sort of channel my kind of honorary role as having worked in the school counseling world for quite a long time, building tools that counselors use, to recognize and sort of, add my voice to this. How do you help bridge the connection between that counseling experience and things that are typically in the domain of counselors, where you might see, come in and teach resiliency, but how do you bridge that, recognizing that that's not something you can do in one session a quarter or one session a year, and really engage the whole faculty in this process?
Fabulous question. And so I don't know the name, but I see North Boone is the first asking me. It's a great question and thinking about it. Julie, thank you, Julie. The way I approach it, and this is out of a lot of research and theory, some of it's quite complex, so I won't go into the details of the theory, but what we need is for our whole school, our educators, our families, we need to have a shared definition of the problem facing our students. I know we want the academics, but the shared definition is really around the social emotional learning and the resiliency. And our educators, our principal leaders that I've worked with in the past, until we focus on connecting with the heart, we're not going to connect with the mind. And that kind of attitude, I think, starts to permeate when you have data to support that conversation. So one of the things that this tool has always been designed to do is to give you as a school data on how your whole school is doing around resiliency. What's the percentage of students that are struggling with some of these mental health and physical health challenges? What percentage are feeling a lot of academic stress? What percentage around the social connections, right? How many are feeling connected to our educators? And when we look at that data, it's easy to start to see a definition emerge. Oh my gosh, we need to start focusing on these issues. Once we have the community saying we need to focus on these issues, right? The next question is, how can we do it? No doubt you're already doing a lot of things, but maybe it's not being done well. Maybe it hasn't been done across the whole school. So I'm not saying you're not doing things in this direction, but by having a collective buy-in, it helps us all lean in more specifically to this. I also think that there's going to be data that you have that you can share. We have individual reports with students, having the students reflect on these and seeing how they are with this, but also including them in the leadership team to think about things we can do. We did that in our high school this last year. Two of the seniors did this as their senior project, and they took on the SEL data. They then analyzed it and they wrote a report up and gave it to the whole community and did 2 major webinars for the community, both the school committee as well as their own school. They did 3, as well as a mental health task force, to say, we need you to focus on these issues, right? So it's the collective definition, the shared definition, that I think helps that coordinate that action forward. What we're doing by having you focus on these resiliency skills is putting that focus on things we can change, things we can affect. But I also want to say, there's a lot of things you may already be doing, and now this is going to add more relevance and meaning to that work, and there may be some things you need to add in.
Hey, Scott, there's a comment that just came into the chat that just says, I agree with all of this, but getting my admin on board is the challenge. And one of the things that's so powerful about the work that you've done with Scholar-Centric is we all know that at the end of the day, like, schools are measured on academic proficiency, right? We're measured on graduation rates, we're measured on English and math proficiency. It feels like this is actually a place where we can connect those dots. So it's not just, we all agree that there's a moral imperative around social emotional learning. It's like, there is a moral imperative, but we can also connect to how your schools are going to be measured. Is that kind of how you might approach the conversation with Sarah's administrator?
Yeah, so two things with it, right? If an administrator is unable to focus on the value of these skills, it's really hard. I'm just going to say it, it's really hard. I was just working with an official at a very large school district, and they talked about the school that is in crisis. And I'm looking at the leadership, like, I don't know if they're ready for me to come in and talk, because the things I'm going to say they need to do, there just isn't an understanding and awareness or ability necessarily to figure this out. So it is hard. The only thing I can say is again, the data. Using, one of the things they did in Denver public schools is they got this data that I just told you about, and they put it on the principal's dashboard. And so they put it up there to say, look, here's where we are as a school, so we can see through the impact of this. We know that, well, let me step back. The way, Sarah, that I do it right now is I show the post-secondary outcomes. And even if I'm dealing with an elementary school and a middle school, I still show the post-secondary outcomes of that high school that I'm working with. I'm fortunate to be in Massachusetts, where I can do that in less than 2 minutes, because all that data is public. In your own state, you can still find some of this data, but it might be a little bit harder. By focusing on the fact that our entering 9th graders in high school, the percentage that actually get through some form of post-secondary 2 or 4 year education background is about 30% if it's good. The minute you start looking at youth of color, youth with disabilities, low-income youth, it drops down to 15% and below. That's the data that our principal and leadership need to understand. That's the problem we're solving. Everything else is what's leading up to that. And if you believe that the academic success is going to drive it, you're wrong. It's not true. It's just not true. And we've got great evidence for that. And motivated students have better academic outcomes. Engaged students have better academic outcomes. That's what we're doing. We're helping create students that are ready to learn. They're ready to engage fully. And also, by the way, in those schools that have given up on their students, what we're finding is once they get engaged, they'll find other avenues for learning. So our Khan Academies are in, I didn't have Khan Academy when I was in Milwaukee, yet I had a whole group of girls coming to the principal saying, the teachers aren't getting us ready for college. And this was in a school where no one went to college. But as they gained a sense of value and a sense of purpose, they had to break down those barriers that they were getting from their direct experience. But I didn't have a Khan Academy to move to, and I would say, great, here's the skills you need. Let's go get them and let's get going. So it really is about, we gotta have that challenge. We gotta find it. The other thing I would do, Sarah, is find those community-based organizations and businesses that get it. Bring your business leaders into the conversation. They get this. The skills we're talking about, Castle has a beautiful alignment of SEL into the workforce, right? These are the skills employers are saying they want. Are we developing those? Employers want those. So if we have conversations where employers are on board and they're getting it, when we can get the elected officials seeing it, when we can get the parents recognizing it, those might be points of pressure as well.
Hey, Scott, I know there's a couple questions waiting for us in the Q&A, but I wanted, since you mentioned when you're working with elementary school educators that this topic also comes up, I just wanted to give you another minute to talk about, since a lot of what we've discussed so far may sound like it's oriented towards secondary school contexts. Can you talk about, I know there's specifically work that you've done, especially with grades 3 through 5, but how does this play into the way a 3rd grade teacher or a 4th grade teacher might approach their day as well?
Yeah, so it's all the same process, right? And I think what we can be using, especially as we think about the elementary all the way up, I think Castle's framework on SEL is beautiful. And what it does is it helps create a better classroom. So we're focusing on, how do I get along with others? How do I manage my behavior? How do I connect with others that I'm learning about? These are all really important skills that make better classrooms. Now roll that up into middle school, that becomes the foundation of mental health. When I'm having positive relationships and able to regulate, I'm able to get positive outcomes. So I'm getting that. And then that becomes the future employability skills. It's all the same stuff. We may do it differently. And I know Castle is linking up a lot of programs that have been evidence-based that are out there. That's awesome. What we believe is these 6 resiliency skills we have down at that elementary school level is a way of organizing for youth, that they need voice and power to see where they're at with these skills so that they can begin regulating themselves, knowing some of the things they need to work on. And I really believe in their ability to take that information and start doing great things with it. So it's helping youth become aware in their own terms what it is that they need to be working on. And I will share, Julie, I will find that for you right now and put that in the chat box. She would like the Castle link, so I'll go get that.
Oh, terrific. While you're doing that, I'll tee up kind of this next question. So, Chris had asked a while back, at least about 10 minutes ago anyway, in working with children and adolescents, I've come across anxiety as a major issue. How do you find anxiety is a factor in resiliency in dealing with different individuals? And so you think that particular aspect is more reliant on teaching mindfulness strategies, or do you find other strategies that are useful as well?
Yeah, so let's remember really important things. First of all, Bandura's self-efficacy theory was developed and discovered through working on anxiety. So learning how to manage anxiety is obviously critical. And when you feel that fear, the first thing you do is withdraw. I used to, when I was a therapist, a psychologist, my specialty was in anxiety disorders. And so absolutely that sense of fear means I move away from it, which becomes reinforcing to step away and feel safer. So what Bandura found was that when individuals felt more confident in managing those stressful situations, they were more likely to approach the feared object and stay longer in the situation with the feared object, right? Which is what we just talked about earlier. So in fact, it's still the same thing. We need mindfulness. We need deep breathing. That's part of the fourth source of self-efficacy, being able to manage the psychological or the physiological reactions I'm having, so I can kind of bring that down a little bit. So absolutely, our cognitive behavior therapy, focusing on the breathing exercises, and now that we're really focusing on mindfulness, which is fantastic. Those are all important foundations. We're not moving away from that at all. We're just integrating it in towards helping this individual gain a sense of power and control within their environment.
Terrific, thank you. So I want to get to Guillermo's question here. And so, the question is, my school brought me in to help students meet the standards for passing, given the circumstances of the past 2 years, COVID, et cetera, and how stunted students seem to be right now. How do you suggest getting teachers on board with the changes that need to be made to keep our students successful?
Thank you, Guillermo. What grade level are we focused on? Just give me a quick one on that so I can orient a little bit. Perfect. So, so first of all, Guillermo, we say loudly, these are smart kids, period. They may not have the tools yet to showcase how smart they are, but they're really smart. I mean, put them in a gaming environment, look what they can do. They can run all over us, right? I mean, it's amazing just how intelligent the youth are. So we need to keep that as an attitude, that what we're trying to do is to help support them to get these skills so they can communicate what they have. I also believe, and I've seen it happen, motivated students can make up grade levels quite quickly. How do we get them motivated? We start with that whole process of future goal setting. Start doing an active, personalized career and academic plan strategy that starts with, what are the possibilities that I can be? If it's okay, I'll put the administrative guide in here, Steve, that they can have free access. I know there's some issues around funding for some, so let me give you the free access guide that you can all use, you can borrow, you can download everything that's here. But one of the who am I activities is where I would start, Guillermo. And what it does is it helps them see the fact that they actually have really strong skills. It's aligned directly to that castle piece. We just created a classroom lesson for it. Let me find my chat box again. And what we did was we use ONET for them to go and see. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. Let me get back to it here. I'm trying to multitask with.
I'm very impressed.
I need like 4 screens in order to be able to do this workshop. Wait, one more time. Hold on, just 1 second. There we go. And there's the chat. Okay. So so then what they do is they find out the skills they have, which, by the way, through gaming, they've got their engineers. A lot of them, if they're playing Minecraft, they're really developing some powerful things. We have them define it for themselves, what they have. Then we go into ONET, and with this advanced search thing, they kind of click on a few things around their skill sets, and they find out that they have the potential for like 500 different occupations. So what we do is we create hope, purpose, we create a sense of possibility, and then we start thinking about, well, how do I get there? right? What do I have to do? And that becomes the career exploration skill set and the strategy. So I am not feeling that the problem necessarily is COVID, because I think they can bounce back. But we've got to stop focusing on that they're somehow ready to learn, because they're not. Our teachers aren't necessarily ready to teach in the full way that we need. Everyone is going through crisis and trauma. So let's put it in the hands of the student through these activities, put some of the pressure off the academics, because what happens is once they realize they have a future goal that they want to look at, they realize I got to start stepping up, and they can make up those grade levels. We've got great systems to help them do this on their own. It doesn't all have to be inside the school. Bring in your youth serving organizations to provide those after school programs with a purpose now. We've got the Upward Bound programs, but now they're entering it with a purpose because they see the value of what they're trying to learn. So I'm not giving up on our youth at all. I think they're strong and resilient. We've all gone through trauma, so we've had a drop. But I have been in schools where they've entered high school in the 4th and 5th grade for math and reading skills. That's how they entered every single year. And by the end of the 9th grade, they were making up grade levels. Once they had a sense of hope, once they felt they were in an environment where they belonged, where they felt truly cared and supported, they exploded. So those girls that I was telling you about that went to the principal in senior year, when they started the 9th grade, that's who they were. And they were in a school that had historically not been serving their students well. They were completely transformed and were making up those grade levels as they went along. So this is where I think we need to be working. Help them establish hope, future goals. What's different now is I had to go out and develop lessons to demonstrate what's in my book. You'll see alignment around that, because just talking in generalities wasn't enough. So here are some free access things you can all use.
And I think, Scott, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if you would say this differently, but it sounds like, in answer to some of the questions that have come about how you make room for this, it's like we could try to do, and come back and say the way that we're going to close, whatever issues or learning gaps that may have emerged over the last couple of years is to just sort of push really hard on academics. But I feel like what you're saying is that that's likely to be kind of a fool's errand in a lot of cases, that unless we've established this kind of baseline of addressing the underlying trauma, we're actually not going to make nearly as much progress. It's going to be a lot more effort for a lot less return than if we just took this time to do what we need to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is about, and I'm responding to Talon's question, to your point, that if we don't have a sense of hope and a sense of purpose, school is just not relevant. And this is exactly what COVID has done, is it's taken away that sense of meaningfulness, that sense of connection. And so I think it's a conversation. I think we have to sit down with youth and say, what do you want out of this? Let's talk about things we can do collectively. Focusing it only as I've got to catch up on academics has never worked. I don't know. I mean, youth did a great job in No Child Left Behind. What they proved to us is that even though we did a better job at teaching math, if they didn't want to learn it, they didn't learn it. I mean, this is the problem. They just, why do I want to learn this? And that's where we have to start. Again, we got to get the heart, get the sense of purpose. And I believe we can do that. Now for Anne, I think, where does it fit in an already loaded day? Well, one, it fits everywhere. But two, advisory seems to be a really important place. And during this whole kind of COVID type thing, reconnecting, slowing it down, finding a place for these conversations. A lot of schools are doing that in having this. And they found that when it comes to SEL, by having that advisory period really structures the time well around those issues. So I think it can happen. It can also happen in some asynchronous way. The lessons I just gave you can be done in multiple ways. It can be done in the classroom, it could be done online in groups, or it can be done in an asynchronous way as well. So it might be that we've got to think about within the bandwidth and the expectations within your communities, there may be some things you can do. But again, if you do the social, emotional, the resiliency work and lean into it, you're going to get more out of it academically. So if you just do the academics, you're not going to go anywhere. So it's sort of like you got to put gas in the tank first to get the engine. I'm going to start throwing metaphors out, 10,000 of them, it looks like. But maybe this is the one that'll get it, right? Maybe the resiliency is the gas. It's the energy. And we got to fill it up because they're empty. And you're empty as educators. So we got to fill you up too. We got to help you feel a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning in the work that you're doing and the sense of hope that we can get through this.
So I want to I know we're down to about 10 minutes, and I've got just questions I want to make sure that we get in here to this conversation. And since you've been working on this topic for such a long time, I just wanted to see if there's anything that's come out of this that's really surprised you. Like, I mean, you've been working on resiliency for 15 years or more, probably much more, right? So, what were the kind of most surprising revelations that might have come out of that work?
Wow, I could go in a lot of directions on that. I'm going to start on one, Stephen. I think you have a different direction, and you can certainly cue me back. But let me just start with this one. There's a couple of things that have happened in my work on research that's been really interesting. So I work with research teams from 18 different countries, and we're all professionals trying to think about how we can help classroom educators really adopt and start using social emotional learning. And we're focused as career researchers on how we can effectively think about these as the human skills, right? No longer talking about soft skills, human skills that those computers can't replace. So we put it in this context of a fourth industrial revolution, and we're really trying to think about how to support educators on that. And out of that work, this is where we start dropping the word career. When you're in South Africa and there's so much violence, the youth have so little hope, that the whole theme of what we're doing is around purpose, hope, and future readiness. And so I changed my center name from career readiness to future readiness, being impacted by that thought. That I think all youth, especially the youth where I'm focused on, and the reason why I developed these assessments, and I know the reason Stephen created Intellispark, is there's a whole population of youth that we do need to be worried about, and they need extra supports. They're similar, whether it's South Africa or in Milwaukee or in Boston. There's a lot of similarity for those youth. So trying to think about how to change our language away from career, which is so loaded on so many levels. It either means career tech ed, it means college, but either way, people kind of fluff it off. Future ready, hope, purpose, those are things we can grab onto. So that's like one of the areas of surprise. The other thing is this last week, I've gotten some longitudinal research, and it clearly shows that when we help youth learn how to aspire, right? When we help them start thinking about their potential and the possibilities, they've got longitudinal research saying that those youth, when they graduate from high school with those aspirations, they earn more money and they're less likely to be unemployed. And the effects are exponential for our most highest demand, highest need students. Wow. I mean, and youth with disabilities, that's the largest impact. When I say high need, high opportunity, I've always felt that that's where we can have the biggest impact. And now last week, I got data showing exactly that. The things we're doing and talking about today, the sense of hope, the sense of purpose, connecting them to the social capital, which means how do I get there? What are the learning pathways? What are the things I can get? All of these things help them move towards success as adults. And it especially affects our high need, high opportunity population. So I'm feeling for the first time, I've always talked about it in quote theory and based on some evidence, but to have the longitudinal data verifying that this is the right work we need to do, very exciting. No, they did not talk about test scores helping them get better wages, right? In fact, what they did is they took the same high academic level, and they looked at those who had these kinds of resiliency skills and had these kinds of future readiness and found that that was the distinguishing feature. That if they didn't have that sense of purpose, they weren't getting as far as adults. So really it continues to drop this back.
So Scott, one other kind of big question is, we've established, I think on this call, you've done a lot of work in this area, that resiliency is clearly tied to academic outcomes. But I also read recently the OECD has studied some of the long-term implications for building resiliency that can show up in workforce outcomes as well. And I'm just curious if you've got a perspective on whether that's because improved academic outcomes lead to better workforce outcomes, or is there an even more direct link potentially with resiliency in the workforce?
Yeah, I think what we're finding and where we're, again, more confidence because the evidence is coming in. When youth get more touches with the world of work, when they get internships, when they get conversations with employers, and also, by the way, when they have conversations with you as educators about their future, each single conversation is accounting for higher wage earnings and decreasing the likelihood of unemployment as they move into adulthood. Very amazing. But there's also something about the employer experience. By immersing themselves within the workplace, they become more adaptable. They become more flexible. And I think it's because they're recognizing the connection between these resiliency skills and how they play out in the authentic world of work, which doesn't, when you're in school, I have to do it because it's a school. Once I start seeing that these same skills have relevance and are helping me be successful in this work setting, all of a sudden, it's starting to help them lean more into those areas. And it's showcasing then that they're building out even stronger resiliency, which then pays off economically down the road. So I think it's very exciting to see some of that.
That's terrific. So we have just 3 minutes left. I wanted to give you an opportunity if there's anything else that we didn't cover today that you wanted to share before I wrap us up.
Yeah, can I address Talon's last point here? Really good one. So the connections, as we talked, we got all that. So we got Success Highways, we got the resiliency assessment, we got the Intellispark. So what's amazing about Steve is he came to me over a year ago saying, oh my gosh, the work we're trying to do, which is now about helping you as educators really have a quick, easy, and a way of knowing what's going on with your students and the way to communicate with your students immediately in time sensitive ways and help point them in the directions they need to go. And that was kind of the system, but we need assessment tools that can help us see where they're at to start with. And so it was obvious that there was this marriage between the Success Highways as an assessment tool and where they were going with the Intellispark. And in fact, if you think of this tool as sort of your summative assessment, right? Seeing where they are at the beginning of the year, seeing where they are at the end of the year after we've done some intervention, where Intellispark comes in is able to push out some of these same resiliency areas with little shorter touch points to see how are we doing. You know, you mentioned connections before. Are we getting a formative assessment saying we're improving in that area? Are we getting there? So it's a just in time as the students moving forward, we're able to connect with them and give them feedback right away, which all students want, right? They always want to hear how great they are. You know, the whole PBIS gotcha tickets that we use in our school. That's our SEL strategy. We will be doing more, but right now we're doing the PBIS. The gotcha tickets, this is great, right? What if you could do that electronically and send them a note that says, hey, I hear this great thing about you from your teacher. That's awesome. Just want to say, keep it going. Who doesn't want to hear that, right? I mean, so these little things as a structured, what I'm trying to say is a technology solution is really necessary. And then what we're also adding in with the Success Highways, of course, is curriculum, and I'm giving you extra curriculum, ways to think about what we can do as we work around that. And we'll be continuing as a company, and as I work with Steve, to try to start bringing out more of these kind of push-in resiliency activities that you can take off the shelf, make your own if you want, or use directly. So we'll continue kind of building that out. But it's a wonderful interconnection and synergy by having a shared perspective, as well as amazing technology platform to put this in, which I've never had before. So I'm feeling like really I feel like I'm in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, and there's all these potentials for supporting you as educators around the work you need. And I just can't tell you how excited I am about that.
We're thrilled to be working with you, Scott. So I really appreciate that. And with that, I know we're at time. So I just want to thank everybody. Scott, certainly thank you for your time, and everybody else, thank you for joining us on this Friday. Once again, be sure to watch your email for your certificate of attendance, as well as the link to the recording and information about how to purchase Scholarcentric at a special rate for joining us today. Please do visit scholarcentric.com. I know Mary had put that in the chat, where you can learn more about our work, and also follow Intellispark on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn if you'd like to stay informed on future events. And with that, just wish you well. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.